Okay, let's get started on the first pillar of the 10 pillars of meaningful marketing. The first pillar is understanding. Understanding really refers to all the elements of your customers, your prospects, your competitors, and even your own company, what your actual employees believe. And you look across that space and we need to identify what do they currently believe about your company, your brand, your products. You sort of have to get into their head a little bit. And unfortunately, the vast majority of many marketing campaigns or programs get developed with an assumption of what these things are as opposed to having some facts. A lot of people don't want to put money into market research or things that they perceive as very expensive. But the fact is that if you don't do some ongoing survey work with existing clients or maybe some very inexpensive survey work with prospective clients or customers, you're really flying blind on almost every marketing decision that you make. So in this particular pillar, we have some exercises for you to fill out, and I want to explain those, and I want you to sort of use this as an opportunity to assess how much you know. In this case, we're going to first talk about your customer segments. So a customer segmentation approach will allow you to categorize different types and groups of customers that then you can then differentiate and decide how much you know about them. So there's a number of different ways that you can differentiate and sort of slice and dice what your segments really are. The more segmented that you have your customers, then the more targeted that you can typically make your marketing investment. For example, if you're a law firm, you might want to target your services or your focus in marketing by industry. Maybe you're stronger in one industry versus another. Or maybe from a geography perspective, if you want to service the local area, there might be industries that are stronger in your area than others. So those are pretty obvious. Those are more demographic focused ways of doing it. If you're a consumer marketer of consumer goods products, you also have ways of segmenting your customers based on their purchase habits, income levels, all kinds of different demographic categories. But there are other ways to segment as well. For example, you could look at it from a revenue perspective. Let's say that you want to focus primarily on customers that have historically given you a lot of purchasing, a lot of revenue. You might also want to take a look into the future and say, we want to focus on customers that are going to give us the highest potential of future revenue. Or, depending on where your company is and where your industry is, you might want to focus more on profitability. Many times people get the mistake, or they get mistaken in focusing on high growth, high revenue segments, but when it comes down to servicing those customers in that segment, they're very unprofitable. So you might want to sort of shift your focus there. So there's a number of ways to do it. It really is up to you as a company to decide how you want to categorize your customers. Another couple ways that you can think about categorizing customers are based on relationship. Perhaps that you as a company value customers that have a long-term lifetime value to you, that customers that will be with you for a long time, and therefore you'll generate more revenue and profit from them. Other times you want to focus on reputation. There might be a couple of market or industry leading companies that you want to focus on, because if those companies purchase from you, other companies will take their lead. So using all these different criteria, you can come up with individual profiles of your customer segments. Now, this is a really important step, because if you don't have this well documented, you cannot take the first steps in targeting your market. So, what are some ways that we can build a profile of each of these customer segments? What are some different ways to sort of describe how these different segments operate and how much you know about them? Well, most everyone these days understands that you can look at it from a demographic perspective. So that would be anything that you can measure via the census or just have some numbers attached to. It could be income levels, zip codes, all different manners of being able to just simply measure where people are at. However, that's not always a good predictor of buying behavior or buying trends. One of the things that we really coach our clients on is to build a profile of the emotional needs of each of your customer segments. In other words, every time they purchase a product, anytime we purchase a product, we're filling an emotional need, even if you're in a business category. For example, if you're a corporate purchasing manager, one of the emotional needs you have is to look good to your peers, to make smart decisions. So even though you might see a spec list that looks a little more compelling than the company you've been buying from, you might be afraid of taking a risk and looking bad. So you have to always think about what the emotional needs of your target customers are. The other thing from a needs perspective that you need to document are the functional needs. And these are the needs that we typically see people focusing on. That would be things like, what job is the product or service trying to fulfill? If I'm trying to buy a computer, what are the functional needs that I have for that computer? I want it to be fast, I want it to have the software that I want, things of that nature. So compare the list of functional needs, which would be sort of your speeds and feeds kinds of categories, with emotional needs. People buy an Apple Macintosh oftentimes because it just feels better to them emotionally. And it doesn't always have the same comparisons, but a lot of people will look at PCs or other things from a more functional perspective. So you'll have to figure that out for your industry, but if you don't have this documented, it's very difficult for you to craft the right message. Now, there's some other things that you want to document in your segment profile. The other one is that you want to understand what the customers in that group, the decision makers in that group, what affinities and interests do they have? In other words, let's say we're targeting young mothers who just have a baby, brand new mothers. What type of interest do they have emotionally and functionally? Obviously, there's a lot to do with trying to trade information about how to take care of a baby. There's all kinds of numbers of different behaviors that you might exhibit. So if you think about what their affinities and interests are in that stage of life, that's the first step in figuring out how do we target, how do we go with our message where they're already hanging out. It might be a mommy blog, it might be a mom's club, locally in the community. So the more you can document that, in terms of where people are going to hang out and swap stories and swap information, the more likelihood you'll have to target where your message should really be. A couple other potential ways to build a profile is to think about what is the change adoption affinity for a customer. In other words, is a customer more likely to be an early adopter of a new product, or are they more conservative? Are they sort of a laggard? And so you can really target your messages based on that as well. Finally, you really want to make sure that the decision-making process for each of these customers is well documented. In other words, the way that a corporate purchasing manager makes a decision is going to be a little more complex than a consumer walking into a grocery store. So whether, obviously it depends on your industry and your scenario, but you have to sort of think through step by step how that consumer will find out information, act on that information, and then how they'll feel about that decision later on. So what I'd like to do is point you to the tool that is beside this video. You can download it. You can sort of basically use it as a customer segmentation map and try to fill out each of these areas based on each individual segment that you've defined. And once you've done that, if you'd like to send it to us for a quick review, we'd love to check that out. So just remember, from a segmentation perspective, there's many different ways to decide how to target or group customers. And then these are the things that you'll need to build into the customer segment profile so that your marketing programs will have a good chance of success.